I'll pin 1 second. Okay, thanks for joining us again. We do have a part sponsorship today, thanks to Hadassah Fuchs, and she's dedicating it to the memory of Brocha Chaya Tal Aleha Shalom Bas Rav Avraham and Sarah Helpfinger on her 10th yard site. Thank you very much, Hadassah. We're still looking for more dedications, more sponsorships, more donations. Anybody who is willing to do that, please email me. It's very important if this series is to continue. And I may be handing over the admin to somebody else as well, as I'm involved in quite a few admin functions at the moment. So I think we're ready to go now, Rabbi Kimche. If you have unmuted yourself, yeah, we're ready to go.
Right. Good morning, everybody. A very special Tuesday morning. Right. A crucial day for the future management of Medinat Yisrael, and we need a special siyata d'shmaya. There is actually a reference in our daily tefillah. We daven for lots of things. In our Shemona Esrei, we daven for health and parnasa and for seichel and das, but we also daven for good leadership. There's a special paragraph in the Shemona Esrei. Hashiva shevteinu k'borishena v'yoatzeinu k'vatchila v'hosem imenu yogoin v'anocha. With bad leadership, we have a life of yogoin v'anocha. We have a life of groaning and suffering. And with good leadership, please God, we will move in the right direction. So that's when I davened this morning, Shacharis, Hashiva shevteinu k'borishena, I had a special kavanah for today, that please God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give Klal Yisrael a bit of da'as to choose a group of people who will lead the country in a better way than the previous group did. But as I mentioned just before the shir began, I think it's very difficult because we've heard so much slander about every single person who is standing. Basically, the whole pre-election campaigns of every party pretty much has been to slander the other parties. That seems to have been as a result of which we've just heard so much negativity about all the other parties and what they've done wrong and done bad. It's very hard to really vote for Leiv Sholem for any one individual, but you can vote for a policy. And the policy is what sort of policy do we want going forward, right? The previous, for example, Minister of Education took the view that the general national syllabus of education doesn't need to contain Tanakh and Jewish history and a learning about the Jewish Masoret. It's more important that they should have in the syllabus. They should learn about the civil rights struggle of the Americans, Martin Luther King's civil rights struggle, and various other items. So basically, she adjusted the national syllabus for 1 million children. That's not important for them to learn Tanakh and Jewish Masoros, because who needs it? So that is a derech. That is an attitude of mine, right? About relating to the policy and the values of Medinat Yisrael. That really, it's not really a land that belongs to us. It belongs to Kol Ezracheha. It belongs to all its inhabitants. It belongs to the Arabs as much as it belongs to us. If you believe in that, then you have to vote for a party that supports that. If you believe in the idea that actually it is a Jewish state and it should preserve its Jewish identity, and that anyone who wants to undermine that and destroy that should not come into power. So you have to vote. You have to vote for a party that really represents your understanding of what's important in the future of Klal Yisrael. Anyhow, I rely on everybody to do their civic duty. But I was looking just recently, again, at the Rambam, 850 years ago, gives us a definition. In the Torah, we find the concept of a ger toshav. Does anybody know what a ger toshav is? We know what a ger is. We know what a ger is. A ger is somebody who's converted into Judaism. But what is a ger toshav? Anybody know?
Temporary resident.
What is it?
Temporary resident.
Temporary resident. Okay, that is a category of the Misrad HaPnim, right? A temporary resident. So they use that maybe. I think they call that a toshav arai as a temporary resident. But a ger toshav is actually in the Torah, and it's a halachic concept. A ger toshav. So the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim defines it as follows. I think it's quite an interesting definition vis-a-vis the Arabs in Israel. A ger toshav means a non-Jewish person who lives in Israel, right? But he abides by several principles. Right? The ger toshav is somebody who is welcome to live in Israel. In other words, the Torah does not give us a view that Israel has to be totally inhabited by Jews and no non-Jews are allowed to live here. That's not what it says in the Torah. The Torah says that the land of Israel is given to Klal Yisrael, but we can have living among us people who are a ger toshav. So ger toshav says the Rambam, there's several criteria. The first criteria is to recognize the sovereignty of the Jewish state, that it's a Jewish nation and they have to recognize the sovereignty. The second thing is they have to renounce violence and renounce corruption. And essentially they have to abide by the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 Noachide laws, which is the minimal basic moral code of the Torah, is the 7 Noachide laws. And if a non-Jew, it seems to be even in biblical times, there were many non-Jews who chose to live among the Jewish people in the land of Israel, and they accepted the sovereignty of the Jewish state. They accepted they were living under in a Jewish country, and they accepted the 7 Noachide laws, and they renounced paganism, renounced violence, renounced immorality, and lived a moral, God-fearing life among the Jewish people in the land of Israel. In that case, they're welcome to stay, and we welcome them as good neighbors. And the truth is, over the years, there have been quite a number of Arabs who qualified for that. Right? The Muslim belief is not in violation of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. It believes in one God, believes in a moral code. It believes in all sorts of different principles which would qualify, and there have been many Arabs along the way, and still today, who completely accept Israel as a Jewish state, the Jewish sovereignty, and work very productively and smoothly together with the Jewish people in the land of Israel. So to say that Orthodox Judaism or the Torah wants us to throw Arabs out of the country is a misrepresentation. What is true is that the minute they refuse to accept the country as a Jewish state, and they refuse to accept the sovereignty, and they promote murder and violence and terrorism, and they praise it, then at that point, then they have no place living among the Jewish people in the land of Israel. So that is really a perspective which comes directly out of halachic definitions. Now, it's difficult to know always how to apply these halachic definitions in modern circumstances. That's always, for that you need to be you need to have a very good understanding of modern circumstances and modern understandings. But I'm just mentioning that there is certainly today, there is an idea today that one has to think to oneself, what is one's derech? What would you like the Jewish state or the Jewish people to look like 5-10 years down the line? And who do you really trust to be at the helm? And please God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give us the right seichel to choose the right sort of people. And I'm certainly not telling anybody what to vote for or who to vote for, but it's certainly something which is an important. It's an important moment every time there's an election, and please God, it won't be yet another one in a long series of elections. Hopefully, this election will actually give us something which is if not, something which has got a certain level of permanence to it. Okay, that's not what this year is about, but since today is a special day, I just wanted to mention it. Everybody, of course, has to do their civic duty. It's interesting on the radio and on the press. One of the things everybody's most nervous about is that people will simply not vote at all. Have you got that feeling as well? Have you heard on the radio, on the television, and in the press, constant reminders, don't forget, it's terribly important, don't stay at home, go and vote. I find that amazing. And they write, actually, that the outcome of the elections will depend primarily on the percentage of people who go out to vote. That is going to be a very crucial issue. And you think to yourself, that's completely amazing. If you look at the history of the last couple of 100 years, people have fought wars and fought battles and given up their life for the right to live in a democratic system where you have the right to vote for your leaders and not have them imposed upon you. And in a situation where you're given it on a silver platter, people say, "No, I can't be bothered. I'm going to the beach. I can't be bothered to go and vote. I'm going to just have a relaxing day today. And who cares? Who cares whether who cares enough in order to vote?" I just find that completely unbelievable. It's just a situation where once something's given to you on a silver plate, you don't value it anymore. I just remember, interestingly, I'll just tell you this, then we'll start with the Shia, that in the 1980s, I went a couple of times to Moscow to help the refuseniks. There were a few organizations from England sending people, I'm sure some of you are aware of this, sending people. Did anybody here go at all to Russia to help the refuseniks, give them a chizuk, to give them money? I went not to give them money, but to give them a chizuk and to give them to teach. I was teaching Torah to many dozens of refusnik teachers. They had groups of teachers who were teaching Judaism and Hebrew to all the other refusniks, and the teachers themselves had an organization that they wanted Rabbonim to come in from Chutz La'aretz, from diaspora everywhere, and to teach them, because they didn't know much either. The teachers didn't know so much. So I was giving shiurim to the teachers of the refusniks, and I gave the shiurim in Ivrit. They spoke Ivrit. They had taught themselves Hebrew. All these refusniks, they spoke a very good Hebrew. Even though learning and teaching Hebrew in Russia at that time was a criminal offense. If you were caught learning or teaching Hebrew language, just the Hebrew language, if you were caught learning or teaching Hebrew, you could end up in prison, end up in the gulag. So this was considered to be a revolutionary activity, learning and teaching just the Hebrew language. But they all learned and they all taught themselves Hebrew, and they taught each other Hebrew. So I remember one of the refuseniks said to me, "Tell me, Rabbi, I want to ask you something. Is it really true?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "I've heard that in London," right here, I was coming from London, "that in London there are thousands of Jewish people who are legally permitted to learn Hebrew, and yet they don't learn it. Can that possibly be true? Is it possibly true that it's not a crime to learn and teach Hebrew in England, and yet people don't learn it? We can't believe that really that's possible. We are risking our lives, the lives of our family and our parnasa, in order to become knowledgeable in Hebrew and in Judaism. And in England, and of course everywhere else, it's perfectly legal to learn and teach Hebrew, and yet people don't do it. And it's a very interesting thing when you have to fight for certain values, people will fight for it and even give up their lives and their livelihoods and their safety for it because they really believe in it. But as soon as they go somewhere and it's handed to them on a silver platter, it becomes less important, and they tend to neglect it. Sadly, the truth is, even these Russian refuseniks, I know several of them who in Russia were very particular about Shabbos and Kashrus and about davening and about Talis and Tefillin. They were very particular. And then when they came to Israel, and within a few years in Israel, they lost their Yiddishkeit. They didn't continue with their Yiddishkeit because there was nothing to fight for. They were handed it on a silver platter. They decided, well, who needs it? It's a quirk of human nature, that if something is valuable to you, you'll fight for it. And the minute you don't need to fight for it anymore, it somehow becomes less important. And it's a weakness. It's a human weakness to take certain things for granted. So we take democracy for granted. But in actual fact, it's not something to be taken for granted. And the fact that we have a chance to vote is a tremendous gift. And that's enough about that for today. Okay, let's just go back to last week's shir. That we started looking at the beginning of Bereshis. And just to remind you, these shiurim, what I'm looking at really is how in the book of Bereshis is really the foundational ideas of the whole of Judaism and the whole future Tanakh is grounded in the book of Bereshis. Bereshis is the most remarkable, collection of narratives and ideas. So just to remind you a little bit what we looked at last week, and then we'll go forward. So last week we looked at the first pasuk of Bereshis. This first pasuk is of extreme importance, and I could spend the next few weeks just talking about that first pasuk, what is written in that first pasuk, right? 7 words: Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So just to remind you, we looked at the Ramban. Okay, so the Ramban is writing, of course, in the 12th century, and the Ramban says something very amazing. He said he interprets this pasuk to mean that the actual bria, the actual creation, when God created the world ex nihilo, he created something out of nothing, that only took place for one split second. One split second on day one, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created something out of nothing. For the rest of the creation, what he was doing was he was shaping and forming that which he created on day one, shaping and forming it into different organisms, different elements, different planets. But the actual, on day one, all he created was raw materials. He created what they would call in modern scientific language a mass of subatomic particles, which could join together to make lots of different types of atoms, lots of different types of molecules, lots of different types of elements can be made. But in the beginning, nothing was yet shaped or formed into anything. Everything was just raw materials. In actual fact, if you look at the descriptions of scientists of today who are describing the Big Bang theory, that's exactly what they write. The scientific view is that there was a Big Bang, which was a massive nuclear explosion, and which created a whole a mass of these subatomic particles. And then later on, they joined together to make up planets and organisms and plants and trees and animals. And as I mentioned to you last week, the fundamental difference that we have from a Torah point of view as against the scientific secular point of view is the idea that this process was, according to the Torah, was guided by the hand of God. That it was a guided process, that God had in mind to create a particular world, and therefore he first brought into existence Yesh Me'ayin, ex nihilo. He brought into existence this whole mass of raw material, and then proceeded out of that raw material to create the entire universe. But it was all done b'chochmas Elokim. B'dvar Hashem shamayim nasu, u'b'ruach piv kol tzava'am. Right? People say in the Tehillim, Lamed Gimel. Right? And this is our emunah. The scientists describe exactly the same process, except that they say without any basis at all, just because they don't know. They say that this was a random process. It just happened by chance. And that the subatomic particles joined each other by chance. And that by chance, it all came together as planets and as galaxies, and then got together to make a tree and to make water and to make animals. All this was just chance mutations in an evolutionary system, and there is no divine intelligence guiding the process. So it's a very interesting thing. The Torah and science are actually describing the same process. The only thing is that the difference between the two is Mizrach and Ma'ariv. The difference between the two is day and night. Because in the secular world, it's just we're living in a chance world. We happen to be a speck of dust. Every human being is a speck of dust in the galaxies, and we exist, but we could easily not have come into existence at all. It was just a stroke of luck. It was random. Right? And from the Torah point of view, everything that was created b'kavana techila. It was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he had in mind to create a certain universe and a certain world, and it was all done with a divine intelligence. And that's the difference. And I showed you that in actual fact, once you understand that difference, you understand one of the first Rashis in the Chumash, who says that Bereshis, the base of Bereshis, doesn't mean Ber meaning in time, in the beginning at a particular point in time. It means Bereshis. Rashi says Ber is Bishvil Rashis, that the world was created for a purpose. Bishvil means for a goal. That for a purpose, Kadosh Baruch Hu created the world for a purpose. And what is that purpose? That purpose is Rashis. So Rashis is a code word in the Tanakh, which means several different things. Rashi brings down two of them. Rashis is a word which refers to the Torah. Rashis is a word that refers to Klal Yisrael. But whatever it refers to, it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had in mind his intention. Right? Acharis Karashis. Right? So this is HaKadosh Baruch Hu understood the end product from the very beginning. He had in mind a particular, like an architect has in mind a particular blueprint before he even digs the foundations. He's already got in his mind what the end goal is going to be. And he builds according to the blueprint that he's got, even before he's even dug the first hole. The architect knows what he's going to build. In the same way, the Torah gives us the blueprint of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's intentions, that he created the world for a purpose. But it's interesting, if you look in the Rashis, there's something I didn't mention last time, which I think is also an interesting, more of a remez. There is in the more mystical, Kabbalistic tradition, the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world using the letters of the alphabet, the Aleph Beis. Right? Now we mentioned that, I don't think we mentioned that last time, but this is a very common, recurring theme in the writings of the Zohar. And in fact, there's a whole book of one of the classic Kabbalistic works, which is called Sefer HaYetzirah, the Book of Creation, which has once been translated by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, but it's difficult to read. It's hard. He did a great job, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, writing in the 1980s. He did a remarkable job translating the Sefer HaYetzirah. Exactly who wrote the Sefer HaYetzirah is not entirely clear. It goes back to the origins of Kabbalah and the Kabbalistic system, a couple of thousand years. I'll call upon him in the Sefer HaYetzirah. One of the fundamental principles is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses the letters of the alphabet to create the world. The letters of the alphabet, in a sense, are his tools for creating and fashioning and bringing into existence everything. In actual fact, there's an interesting Gemara in Brachas, which deals with the building of the Mishkan in the desert. It speaks about the significance of every item in the Mishkan corresponded to something in the Bria. So the Gemara there says in Brachas about Betzalel, that Betzalel had Ruach HaKodesh. Betzalel had, in fact, Rashi brings it down. Rashi says, the Pasuk says about Betzalel that he had Chochma, Bina, and Das. And if you look in Rashi on the Chumash, Rashi says that the Das of Betzalel was Ruach HaKodesh. He had a certain spiritual, deep understanding. And the Gemara says, what was his understanding? So the Gemara uses a very interesting phrase. Yodeya haya Betzalel letzare for osios shabo nivru shamayim v'aretz. Betzalel knew the secret of how to combine the letters with which the world was created. In other words, the world was created using the Hebrew letters. And there is actually a very interesting thing, and I'm sure you've all heard magicians every now and again using the word abracadabra. Okay, what does abracadabra mean? Anybody know abracadabra? So abracadabra is actually Hebrew. More correctly, it's probably Aramaic, but it's an Aramaic form of Hebrew. Abracadabra, abra means I will create. Abra, Beis Reish Aleph means Bereshis bara Elokim. Abra means I will create. Kedabra, by speaking. I'll create something through speaking. That's abracadabra. It was used by magicians to pretend that they were creating new things through the use of magic. And they used this idea that, so to speak, the word lahavdil, like the word of God, was able to create new items. They can also create new things. Having said all that, one of the interesting comments made by the Sefer Yetzirah on the first pasuk. So let's have a look at the first pasuk again, just to remind ourselves. I don't think anybody really needs to be reminded of the first pasuk of the Torah, but I'll just second. Bear with me for 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know why this is. Difficulty sharing this, don't know why exactly. Give me a moment. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just trying to get my screen to do what I told it to do. For some reason, it's being difficult. Share screen. I don't know why. I don't know why my screen is refusing to be shared. Did you give me permission to share a screen?
I have given you permission to share screen.
I thought so.
Very strange.
Strange. Okay, I'll just close everything else on my thing. Let's have a look. Why is this not coming up?
Ah.
There's a screen. It's just the wrong screen, that's all.
That's all, yes.
But it's a
That's it.
That's it. Okay, got it now?
Yeah.
Is everybody with me? Sorry about that. So we're looking at this first pasuk, this famous first pasuk. Let's have a look at it together, ladies and gentlemen, just for a few moments, these 7 words. Bereshis bara Elokim, es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. Okay? In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So I just want to make a couple of interesting remarks here, which are made by the Sefer Yetzirah and more in the Kabbalistic tradition. The first one is the word Bereshis bara Elokim Ace. What does ace mean? The word ace is a very strange word in the Torah. It's sometimes there and sometimes isn't. And when you translate it, it doesn't actually translate into anything at all. Imagine the pasuk would have said, Bereshis bara Elokim shamayim va'aretz. Right? In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. If there would have been no ace, right? So the word ace appears twice here. I mean, ace hashamayim, the ace haaretz. Right? And we think that ace means the, but it isn't. The is hashamayim and the haaretz. So he could have read Bereshis bara Elokim shamayim va'aretz, and it would have meant exactly the same thing. So what is es hashamayim the es haaretz? So what does the Sefer Yetzirah say? The Bereshis bara Elokim ace means the ace is aleph to taf, from the first to the last letter of the Hebrew language. The aleph, the ace means aleph and taf. It's a reference to the first thing God created. Before he could create anything at all, he created his tools. And what were his tools? His tools were ace, aleph, taf. Right? The entire 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. That's the first thing he created. And then he created shamayim, and then he created aretz. So it's interesting that the word ace has got in itself an interesting symbolic meaning, even though it has no translated meaning at all. Right? We don't pick up in translation ever the word ace. The word ace is seemingly a completely superfluous word in the whole Torah. Right? Even here later on, let's say here where it says Vayar Elokim es ha'ar kitov. It could easily well have said Vayar Elokim ha'ar kitov without the word es, and it flows nicely in Hebrew, and it translates exactly the same. So what is the es doing there? The aleph and the taf. Right? So the Kabbalists say that the ace is always a reference to this idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is using the Hebrew alphabet from the first to the last letter in order to bring things into existence. Right? B'dvar Hashem shamayim nasu. The world was created through the word of God, and the word of God was with these letters. And therefore these letters have got an immense significance. Incidentally, if you take seriously this thesis of the Mekubalim, it gives us a different perspective, I think, on Hebrew script. That I think the secular scientific world would have us believe that the Hebrew script developed from earlier Canaanite scripts and earlier Hittite scripts and was really a derivative of earlier Near Eastern languages. But in actual fact, according to the tradition of the Mekubalim, that's not the case at all. In actual fact, the Hebrew language was there from the very beginning and even before the very beginning. The Hebrew language was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the tools for creating heaven and earth. And he put into the Hebrew language lots of very interesting and a tremendous power of creation. In last week's parsha, when it spoke about the Tower of Babel, right? The Parshas Noach, it spoke about the fact that everybody in the world was all united and spoke one language. And then after the Tower of Babel, they were all dispersed and spoke different languages. So if you look at Rashi, the pasuk says that everybody was Sofa Achas. The whole world spoke only one language. And this is pre-Avraham Avinu. Everybody only spoke one language, says Rashi, Lashon HaKodesh. The tradition of Chazal was that the Hebrew language and the combination of Hebrew letters into Hebrew words was in fact the primordial creation. The creation that preceded all other creations. Before anything real was created, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made for himself the tools of the letters of the alphabet, and those letters somehow later on were given the power to be able to bring into existence a Shamayim Va'aretz. It's interesting. I always find it fascinating when you speak to geneticists that they speak about the chromosomes on the DNA. They also regard them as letters, that the letters combine to make up certain chromosomes and make up certain genetic forces. That these are also combinations of letters are primary in the creation of the world. Okay. Moving on, let's have a look at a particular text that we didn't look at last week. Let's have a look at this. Just going down here for a moment. Here we have a text that we all say every Friday night. Second. Okay, here's the text from Bereshis of Shabbos, right? Right? After the end of day 6, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had completed, from the word Kaf Lamed Hey, which means to complete. He completed creation of heaven and earth. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had completed all the work that he had planned to make. And now I'm interested in the last sentence here. Look, interested in this last sentence. Oops. Sorry. Let's have a look at this. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Shabbos, gave the 7th day a bracha and a kedusha. Right? In other words, on the 7th day, no physical new creations took place, but it was a day where the whole physical universe became infused with Vayivorech, right, but with a blessing, and Vayikadesh, and a kedusha. And the world was enabled to be used as a receptacle, as a kli that was able to receive bracha and kedusha from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? For 6 days, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was, so to speak, bringing into existence fish and trees and animals and planets and the solar system and the entire universe. But they were just physical objects. Now on Shabbos, he gave them the ability to be recipients of Vayivorech and Vayikadesh. That's really the crucial point of Vayichulu on Friday night. So what do we say here? Kivo Shabbos mikol malachtoi asher bara Elokim lasos. So again, let's have a closer look at this text for a minute. So what does it mean? It says Kivo Shabbos, on that day he rested, right? Mikol malachto, from all his work of the 6 days. Now, what would have been wrong if the pasuk would have ended there? The pasuk could have said, "Vayivorech Elokim es yom vayikadesh." So Kivo Shabbos mikol malachto. HaKadosh Baruch Hu rested from all his work. What are we saying here? Asher bara Elokim lasos. What does that mean? Lasos means to do. To do what? So why do we need these last 4 words? So next Friday night, I suggest that when you make Kiddush, you stop after Kivo Shabbos mikol malachto, and you should just stop and have a look at the faces of the people around the table and see what they think. Right? Whether you've done a good job or not of making Kiddush without mentioning these last 4 words. What does it mean, Asher bara Elokim? And what does lasos mean? Lasos means to do, but to do, the word lasos usually takes an object. So lasos malachto, lasos, to do something, but to do what? So let's have a look for a moment at the Orach Chaim HaKodesh. Orach Chaim HaKodesh says something very beautiful, which relates to something we looked at last week. Okay. I'm looking now at this text of the Orach Chaim HaKodesh. Everybody with me? So he says as follows. Right, the Orach Chaim is, of course, writing in the 18th century. one of the Gedolim of Morocco. Bar Chaim was one of the Gedolei Yisrael. Right, at that time, for many hundreds of years, Morocco was a great Torah center, and he was one of the great Talmid Chacham of his age, and he in fact came on Aliyah. I'm sure some of you have been in the old city of Jerusalem. Anybody been in the old city of Jerusalem and noticed there's a street called Orachai, and in it there's a little shul, which is reputed to be his shul, Orachai Makadim. So he came from Morocco without the Misrara Klita and without Nefesh B'Nefesh, right? And without El Al. He came on the back of a camel and in a ship which was heaving in the waters of the Mediterranean. And he probably traveled for I don't know how long, for a few months. And he wasn't traveling business class. And he arrived in Israel in the mid-1700s. And he became the Rav. He was acclaimed as the Rav of Yerushalayim for many years, the middle of the 1700s. Anyhow, let's have a look. And he wrote a very remarkable commentary on the Chumash. So he says here, Masha Omar HaKosov. I'm now reading out from the highlighted text. Masha Omar HaKosov. Let's have a look at the pasuk. Kivoy Shabbos Mikol Malachto Ashabora and Akim Lases. He says, what do these words mean? She'ein mashmos lichta. There is no meaning to these last words. What do these words mean? Uvamasha perashto, Uvamasha perashnu yovo kamincho. But if you understood what I've been explaining to you, all this is absolutely clear. How is that? He says, Kivo showas v'kol malachta ashabora. What does that mean? It means biyom habariyah. It's referring back to the first moment of the first day, which was the Yom HaBriyah, which was the only moment where something was created ex nihilo, was created yesh me'ayin. So he says, what was the malacha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did? Asher bara, that he created la'asos, pirush. What does it mean, la'asos? What does it mean? L'takein b'sheish hayamim. That he then, in the next 6 days, he was metaken. So what does metaken mean? Metaken means, so to speak, to fashion something, to take a piece of wood and make it into a chair, right? To take a piece of silver and make it into a cup, right? But letaken is la'asos, which means to take previously existing raw materials, the wood or the silver, and to metaken it, to make it into something usable. So it says here, he says, Kisheishes Yomim Osa Hashem, Upirish Tike. It means that he made something out of pre-existing raw materials. Why is that? So that's how he spells it out. Ki habriya b'yom harisha, b'mayma echad nivres. The bria, the entire bria, actually came into existence on day one, but it hadn't yet been sort of made into its specific elements. In other words, it was all still like one giant Lego set, right? One massive sort of intergalactic Lego set, which had not yet been, the pieces hadn't been put together yet, right? Elo, shahaya kol chosotikot, nothing had been assembled yet. What do I mean? He says, if you want to build a palace, you want to build a house, but kodem, that before you build the house, what do you do before you build the house? Meichin, avonim, the eitzim, the offer. You prepare the stones, the woods, the cement, all the raw materials you're going to need for the building process. The tzarchei habinyan, the mushlam, all the things that you know you're going to need. But all these pre-exist the building. In other words, a builder does not engage in burial. He never builds anything out of nothing. He builds from pre-existing material. So the first thing HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to do was an act of bria. That was the one and only moment of creation ex nihilo. And then once he's got the raw materials, then he's able to build the house. Says the Orach Chaim. Cain similarly, in one dibur, right? In one statement. In other words, the word bereshis, right, was in fact the first. The Mishnah Pirkei Avos famously says, "Ba'asara ma'amoros nivra ha'olam." The world was created with 10 statements of God. God spoke 10 times, right? So the Gemara, what does it mean? It means that throughout the Bereshis chapter 1, it says, "Vayomer Elokim yehi or, Vayomer Elokim tache oretz desha, Vayomer Elokim yehi rokia." Each Vayomer is a statement of God, and that statement brought it into existence. Says the Gemara, but wait a minute, we counted up the Vayomers, and there's only 9 of them. This is an old Jewish trick, incidentally. You know, you say there are 10, and you count them up, and there are only 9, right? So why is that? You find that very often. You know, it's always Chazal do this in order to get us to think a bit more deeply, to think deeper about what's going on here. Chazal are not just simply counting up the numbers of Vayomers in chapter 1. There are 9 Vayomers, and yet it says Asora Ma'amoros Nivra Ha'olam. Says the Gemara, no. Bereshis Nami Ma'amoru. The word Bereshis was also a Ma'am. It's true in the first pasuk, it doesn't say Vayomer Elokim Nivra Shamayim V'aretz. It doesn't say Vayomer, but the word Bereshis was also a Ma'ama. What was brought into existence with the word Bereshis? What was brought into existence was all the stones and all the raw materials necessary for the building. So that's what he says here in the highlighted line on the screen. Kain habore baruchu bara kol tzarchei ha'olam b'dibur echad. All the raw materials that will ever be needed for creating every plant and every animal and every planet in the whole galaxy, all the raw materials already were brought into existence in one moment at the Big Bang on Bereshis bara Elokim. V'heichinai, says the Orach Chaim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had prepared it. V'hoyo hakol munach, but everything was, so to speak, lying there. Godush be'irbuvia, all in one big. What's an irbuvia? Irbuvia is a right? La'arbev in modern Hebrew. La'arbev is to mix. When you mix in the kitchen, you mix things. It's la'arbev, ayin reish, beis, and that comes from this word here, irbuvia, an Aramaic word, which means a mixture. It's all collected together in one mixture. And then he started to get things organized. Davar dibur alofonov, each item by itself, right? The Elokim tache or its desha. The Prophet said, let these particles come together and form vegetation, form trees, right? Eitz peri osa peri, right? Well, also paulo yisala shema. And that was how HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought the world into existence. So what has he told us here? Let's get back to the pasuk. The pasuk says, Asher bara Elokim la'asos. So he's got a very good pshat here. He's got a very good pshat. So another look at this pasuk here. Pshat is, so he says as follows: Baruch Elokim es yom hashvi. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought bracha into the world on Shabbos. By Kadesh also he brought kedusha. Kivo Shabbos become malachta. There HaKadosh Baruch Hu rested from all his work, and here in the last 4 words, it gives us a synopsis of how the entire. It gives us a synopsis of how the entire creation worked. Right? Hashem bara Elokim. The first thing that happened was HaKadosh Baruch Hu engaged in an act of bria, yesh me'ayin. La'asos in order out of these raw materials to create everything else in existence. So it's a two-stage creation, right? The first, the Bria, and then the Asiya, right? First, the creation of raw materials, and then shaping these raw materials into other items, into everything that existed in the world. So next time you say Kiddush, Rabbi on Friday night, you can ask the people sitting at the table, what do you think it means, Asher bara Elokim lasos? Lasos what? Lasos what? What is he doing? What is he making? The answer is he's making the world out of the raw materials Asher bara. And the Pasuk here wants to emphasize this. These are the closing words of the whole act of creation. Asher bara Elokim lasos. It started with Beria, and once the Beria of the particles, the mass, the unthinkable the mass of particles necessary to create galaxies and planets and Earth and everything to the smallest detail, right? The DNA of the living cell, all that was already in God's mind as a plan, and now he had the raw materials for it. And then lasos means to bring it all into its right place, to make them all combine properly. So I just want to take this idea one step further, finally, in the and have a look at one other very strange and very fascinating pasuk. We'll have a closer look at it maybe again next week. But this is one of the most famous psukim in Bereshit chapter 1. Can you see this highlighted pasuk? Vayoma Elokim. This is on day 6. Na'aseh Odom. Let us make a human being, but Salmeinu Kidmusay, in the image of God. What exactly that means, we'll speak about that maybe another time. And he will dominate. He will be the dominating creature in the entire world. Right? That man, through his understanding and his knowledge and his wisdom, he will be able to dominate the animal world, the world of vegetation, everything. He will be able to dominate it using his skills. But what is the most strikingly unusual word in this pasuk? Is the word na'aseh. Right? In the whole of Bereshit chapter 1, this is probably one of the most unusual words to be used. What does na'aseh mean? Any offers on na'aseh?
Let us make.
Let us make, yes. It's a plural. Let us make Adam. All the way through the 6 days of creation, it's Vayoma Elokim this, and Vayoma Elokim that, and God did this, and God made that. And this is clearly the creator of the world going through the process. And now says suddenly he's in the plural. So what sort of plural could there possibly be? And Rashi even comments. Rashi says this word opens a door for apikorosim. That's what Rashi says. Rashi says this word opens the door for apikorosim to suggest that God was not alone in the creation, that there were other forces, chas v'shalom, involved in the creation of the world, right? But we know it was Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. There was only one God who was creator of the world. So what does na'aseh mean? Why use the plural? Why use the plural? Anybody ever heard anything interesting on this question? Why would the Torah use the plural of na'aseh? Let us make man.
I think you said in one shir the na'aseh was Kodesh Baruch Hu and the angels, the Malchei Hasharetz.
Yes, you're quite right. You're quite right. Thank you, Michael. Yes, there is a whole midrashic tradition here that God is addressing the malachim, and he's asking their opinion. Should we create man? Let's do this together. I want your opinion. Should we create this human being? And of course, the malachim, what did they say? They said, no, not a good idea. This human being that you're describing to us, right, is only going to be trouble. Right? They're only going to be trouble. He's not going to be a person of MS. Right? You are the God of MS, and the human being is not going to be MS. right? He's not going to live a life of MS. He's going to be weak, and he's going to give in to temptations. So the malachim, so to speak, this is a midrashic, very interesting midrashic, so to speak, dialogue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the malachim, sort of deliberating about the human being. Eventually, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, yes, it's true that he will ultimately be tempted away from the MS, but he will do a lot of chesed. He'll do a lot of chesed, in the Medrash says. The chesed that the human being does, that was really the crucial argument. Or maybe we'll have a look more at this Medrash later on. But let's have a look very briefly, just to end the shir. Actually, I can see it's already 11:15. The next piece will take about 10 minutes. I'm not sure we've got any more time for this this morning. We'll leave this a bit of homework for you, ladies and gentlemen. Homework for you. I'm leaving you with homework, ladies and gentlemen. A little bit of homework for you. Try and look up in the Chumash that you have what are the suggested interpretations. Why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when it comes on day 6 of creation, it comes to creating man, why would he say na'aseh, we in the plural will create man? Everything was created directly by HaKadosh Baruch Hu without anybody's help at all. So we've mentioned the midrashic idea of a narrative with the malachim. This is one particular midrashic interpretation. But what are other ideas here? So that's homework for you to have a look at. And Bez Hashem, next week we'll pick that up, and I'll show you a very fascinating perush on this subject. If I'm not mistaken, it just occurred to me while I'm talking to you that the late Rabbi Abraham Twersky, I'm sure many of you have heard of him, and maybe you've got some books of his, right? A famous Talmud Chacham and psychologist, wrote a book, if I'm not mistaken, which is entitled "Let Us Make Man." "Let Us Make Man" is the title of his book, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have that book, but I seem to have seen the book. And the theory behind this title is that actually HaKadosh Baruch Hu is addressing all future mankind. And he's saying, when it comes to all the other animals, I created them as they are. But with a human being, I'm only creating the potential ideas and strengths. And together with you, we can make the real man. That's basically his idea. It's more of a psychological idea. He's addressing us. He's saying, Nase Adam, let us together make a complete man. Let us together, I'll give you the raw materials, and you can make out of it something wonderful. The creation of man was the only creation in the whole 6 days of creation that God created something of tremendous potential which hadn't yet been realized. Right? To realize that potential is actually the challenge of the human being, to make out of oneself the best person one can possibly be, to use one's strengths and abilities and assets and resources in the best way possible. That is Naaseh Odom. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, let's you and us together make the real man. But please God, next week I'll show you some very interesting material on this subject. By next week, we'll already have a wonderful government, ladies and gentlemen. By the time we get together next week, we'll already have the most fantastic Israeli government you can possibly imagine. The dream team government will have come into power, and the future will be looking very bright. And I'm quite sure, please God, today, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give into the minds and hearts of Klal Yisrael the seichel toiv to make the right decisions so that we can establish this country as a proper Jewish country, and that we're not doubtful about the Medina Yehudit. We don't doubt it. We're not trying to give it away. We're not trying to get rid of it. We're trying to defend it and develop it. And we welcome everybody, including non-Jews and Arabs, to join us, provided they accept the sovereignty of the land of Israel, and provided they renounce violence and corruption. We invite them all to join us in building a wonderful future for Medinat Israel. And like myself, most of you have traveled long distances to come here and become part of this wonderful country. And casting your vote, ladies and gentlemen, is part of the mitzvah of Yishuv Haaretz. Casting your vote intelligently is part of the mitzvah. There's a mitzvah min HaTorah of Yishuv Haaretz, of settling the land, strengthening the land, ensuring the future of the land. And there's no question that electing the people who know how to do this is part of that mitzvah. So you can go in there, you can make a bracha. I'm not sure what bracha you make, but what bracha would you make? We'll have to make up a bracha for voting. Right? Uvucharto b'chayim. Pasuk in the Torah, to choose life, right? To choose the right sort of life is certainly a mitzvah, and that's our mitzvah of today. And it's been very nice to see you all again. And please God, next week we'll get back together again.